Miscellaneous Aphorisms by Oscar Wilde. Note to the listener. This particular collection of aphorisms was published posthumously in 1911 and preceded the essay The Soul of Man under Socialism. It was also published under Wilde's pseudonym Sebastian Melmoth. And now the aphorisms. The mystery of love is greater than the mystery of death. Women are made to be loved, not to be understood. It is absurd to have a hard and fast rule about what one should read and what one shouldn't. More than half the modern culture depends on what one shouldn't read. Women, as someone says, love their ears just as men love their eyes, if they ever love at all. It is better to be beautiful than to be good, but it is better to be good than to be ugly. Nothing looks so like innocence as an indiscretion. Misfortunes one can endure. They come from outside. They are accidents. But to suffer for one's faults, there is the sting of life. Beauty is the only thing that time cannot harm. Philosophies fall away like sand. Creeds follow one another. But what is beautiful is a joy for all seasons, a possession for all eternity. Questions are never indiscreet. Answers sometimes are. 20 years of romance makes a woman look like a ruin, but 20 years of marriage makes her something like a public building. The only thing that one really knows about human nature is that it changes. Anyone can sympathize with the sufferings of a friend, but it requires a very fine nature to sympathize with a friend's success. Selfishness is not living as one wishes to live. It is asking others to live as one wishes to live. And unselfishness is letting other people's lives alone, not interfering with them. A man who does not think for himself does not think at all. Nowadays, people seem to look on life as a speculation. It is not a speculation. It is a sacrament. Its ideal is love. Its purification is sacrifice. In old days, nobody pretended to be a bit better than his neighbor. In fact, to be a bit better than one's neighbor was considered excessively vulgar and middle class. Nowadays, with our modern mania for morality, everyone has to pose as a paragon of purity, incorruptibility, and all the other 7 deadly virtues. And what is the result? You all go over like 9-pins, one after the other. All sympathy is fine, but sympathy with suffering is the least fine mode. If you pretend to be good, the world takes you very seriously. If you pretend to be bad, it doesn't. Such is the astounding stupidity of optimism. It is most dangerous nowadays for a husband to pay any attention to his wife in public. It always makes people think that he beats her when they're alone. The world has grown so suspicious of anything that looks like a happy married life. Actors are so fortunate. They can choose whether they will appear in tragedy or in comedy, whether they will suffer or make merry, laugh or shed tears. But in real life it is different. Most men and women are forced to perform parts for which they have no qualifications. The world is a stage, but the play is badly cast. Men know life too early. Women know life too late. That is the difference between men and women. He who stands most remote from his age is he who mirrors it best. There is only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. Life is not governed by will or intention. Life is a question of nerves and fibers and slowly built up cells in which thought hides itself and passion has its dreams. Man is a being with myriad lives and myriad sensations, a complex, multiform creature that bears within itself strange legacies of thought and passion, and whose very flesh is tainted with the monstrous maladies of the dead. As long as a woman can look 10 years younger than her own daughter, she is perfectly satisfied. There is always something infinitely mean about other people's tragedies. Public and private life are different things. They have different laws and move on different lines. When one is placed in the position of guardian, one has to adopt a very high moral tone on all subjects. It's one's duty to do so. I have always been of opinion that a man who desires to get married should know either everything or nothing. An engagement should come on a young girl as a surprise, pleasant or unpleasant as the case may be. It is hardly a matter that she could be allowed to arrange for herself. If the lower classes don't set us a good example, what on earth is the use of them? They seem, as a class, to have absolutely no sense of moral responsibility. If a woman cannot make her mistakes charming, she is only a female. The world was made for men and not for women. It is always with the best intentions that the worst work is done. If you wish to understand others, you must intensify your own individualism. Why do you talk so trivially about life? Because I think that life is far too important a thing ever to talk seriously about. What a pity that in life we only get our lessons when they are of no use to us. It is better to have a permanent income than to be fascinating. Relations are simply a tedious pack of people who haven't got the remotest knowledge of how to live nor the smallest instinct about when to die. Charity creates a multitude of sins. My experience is that as soon as people are old enough to know better, they don't know anything at all. Truth is a very complex thing, and politics is a very complex business. There are wheels within wheels. One may be under certain obligations to people that one must pay. Sooner or later in political life, one has to compromise. Everyone does. Men can love what is beneath them, things unworthy, stained, dishonored. We women worship when we love, and when we lose our worship, we lose everything. The proper basis for marriage is a mutual misunderstanding. The one advantage of playing with fire is that one never gets even singed. It is the people who don't know how to play with it who get burned up. There are moments when one has to choose between living one's own life fully, entirely, completely, or dragging out some false, shallow, degrading existence that the world and its hypocrisy demands. When one is in town, one amuses oneself. When one is in the country, one amuses other people. It is excessively boring. Romance is the privilege of the rich, not the profession of the unemployed. The poor should be practical and prosaic. An acquaintance that begins with a compliment is sure to develop into a real friendship. It starts in the right manner. The truths of metaphysics are the truths of masks. Science can never grapple with the irrational. That is why it has no future before it in this world. The happy people of the world have their value, but only the negative value of foils. They throw up and emphasize the beauty and the fascination of the unhappy. In this world there are only two tragedies. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. The last is much the worst. The last is a real tragedy. Disobedience in the eyes of anyone who has read history is man's original virtue. It is through disobedience that progress has been made, through disobedience and rebellion. It is not wise to find symbols in everything that one sees. It makes life too full of terrors. Comfort is the only thing our civilization can give us. Politics are my only pleasure. You see, nowadays it is not fashionable to flirt till one is 40, or to be romantic till one is 45. So we poor women who are under 30, or say we are, have nothing open to us but politics and philanthropy. And philanthropy seems to me to have become simply the refuge of people who wish to annoy their fellow creatures. I prefer politics. I think they are more becoming. One's past is what one is. It is the only way by which people should be judged. In a very ugly and sensible age, the arts borrow, not from life, but from each other. It is always a silly thing to give advice, but to give good advice is fatal. Secrets from other people's wives are a necessary luxury in modern life. So at least I am told at the club by people who are bald enough to know better. That no man should have a secret from his own wife. She invariably finds it out. Women have a wonderful instinct about things. They discover everything except the obvious. Life holds the mirror up to art, and either reproduces some strange type imagined by painter or sculptor, or realizes in fact what has been dreamed in fiction. I feel sure that if I lived in the country for 6 months, I should become so unsophisticated that no one would take the slightest notice of me. To recommend thrift to the poor is both grotesque and insulting. It is like advising a man who is starving to eat less. A thing is not necessarily true because a man dies for it. I am always saying what I shouldn't say. In fact, I usually say what I really think, a great mistake nowadays. It makes one so liable to be misunderstood. Experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes. The true perfection of man lies not in what man has, but in what man is. The basis of every scandal is an absolute immoral certainty. People talk so much about the beauty of confidence. They seem to entirely ignore the much more subtle beauty of doubt. To believe is very dull. To doubt is intensely engrossing. To be on the alert is to live. To be lulled into security is to die. Every effect that one produces gives one an enemy. To be popular, one must be a mediocrity. It is a sad truth, but we have lost the faculty of giving lovely names to things. Names are everything. I never quarrel with actions. My one quarrel is with words. That is the reason I hate vulgar realism in literature. The man who could call a spade should be compelled to use one. It is the only thing he is fit for. A high moral tone can hardly be said to conduce very much to either one's health or one's happiness. There are terrible temptations that it requires strength and courage to yield to stake all one's life on one throw. Whether the stake be power or pleasure, I care not. There is no weakness in that. There is a terrible courage. Nowadays, it is only the unreadable that occurs. All charming people are spoiled. It is the secret of their attraction. There is more to be said for stupidity than people imagine. Personally, I have a great admiration for stupidity. It is a sort of fellow feeling, I suppose. All men are monsters. The only thing to do is to feed the wretches well. A good cook does wonders. There is no such thing as an omen. Destiny does not send us heralds. She is too wise or too cruel for that. Crying is the refuge of plain women, but the ruin of pretty ones. Love art for its own sake, and then all things that you need will be added to you. This devotion to beauty and to the creation of beautiful things is the test of all great civilizations. It is what makes the life of each citizen a sacrament and not a speculation. It is always worthwhile asking a question, though it is not always answering one. It takes a thoroughly good woman to do a thoroughly stupid thing. With the proper background, women can do anything. Chiromancy is a most dangerous science, and one that ought to be not encouraged, except in a tete-a-tete. One should never take sides in anything. Taking sides is the beginning of sincerity, and earnestness follows shortly afterwards, and the human being becomes a bore. The work of art is beautiful by being what art never has been, and to measure it by the standard of the past is to measure it by a standard on the reflection of which its real perfection depends. There are three kinds of despots. There is the despot who tyrannizes over the body. There is the despot who tyrannizes over the soul. There is the despot who tyrannizes over soul and body alike. The first is called the prince. The second is called the pope. The third is called the people. Costume is a growth, an evolution, and a most important, perhaps the most important sign of the manners, customs, and mode of life of each century. I really don't see anything romantic in proposing. It is very romantic to be in love, but there is nothing romantic about a definite proposal. Why, one may be accepted. One usually is, I believe. Then the excitement is all over. The very essence of romance is uncertainty. What consoles one nowadays is not repentance, but pleasure. Repentance is quite out of date. Ideals are dangerous things. Realities are better. They wound, but they are better. Unless one is wealthy, there is no use in being a charming fellow. Shallow sorrows and shallow loves live on. The loves and sorrows that are great are destroyed by their own plenitude. An eternal smile is much more wearisome than a perpetual frown. The one sweeps away all possibilities, the other suggests 1,000. To disagree with 3/4 of England on all points is one of the first elements of vanity, which is a deep source of consolation in all moments of spiritual doubt. Women live by their emotions, and for them. They have no philosophy of life. As long as war is regarded as wicked, it will always have a fascination. When it is looked upon as vulgar, it will cease to be popular. There is only one thing worse than injustice, and that is justice without her sword in her hand. When right is not might, it is evil. We spend our days, each one of us, in looking for the secret of life. Well, the secret of life is in art. The truth isn't quite the sort of thing that one tells to a nice, sweet, refined girl. If one plays good music, people don't listen. And if one plays bad music, people don't talk. How fond women are of doing dangerous things. It is one of the qualities in them that I admire most. A woman will flirt with anybody in the world as long as other people are looking on. English women conceal their feelings till after they are married. They show them then. Moderation is a fatal thing. Nothing succeeds like excess. Actions are the first tragedy in life. Words are the second. Words are perhaps the worst. Words are merciless. Life is terrible. It rules us. We do not rule it. In art, there is no such thing as a universal truth. A truth in art is that whose contradictory is also true. One's days are too brief to take the burden of another's sorrows on one's shoulders. Each man lives his own life and pays his own price for living it. The only pity is that one has to pay so often for a single fault. One has to pay over and over again indeed. In her dealings with man, destiny never closes her accounts. Pleasure is nature's test, her sign of approval. When we are happy, we are always good. But when we are good, we are not always happy. The people who love only once in their lives are really the shallow people. What they call their loyalty and their fidelity, I call either the lethargy of custom or their lack of imagination. Better to take pleasure in a rose than to put its roots under a microscope. Of Shakespeare, it may be said that he was the first to see the dramatic value of doublets, and that a climax may depend on a crinoline. Plain women are always jealous of their husbands. Beautiful women never are. They never have time. They are always so occupied in being jealous of other people's husbands. Land has ceased to be either a profit or a pleasure. It gives one position and prevents one from keeping it up. A man who moralizes is usually a hypocrite, and a woman who moralizes is invariably plain. There is nothing in the whole world so unbecoming to a woman as a nonconformist conscience, and most women know it, I am glad to say. It was a fatal day when the public discovered that the pen is mightier than the paving stone, and can be made as offensive as a brickbat. A map of the world that does not include utopia is not worth even glancing at, for it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing, and when humanity lands there it looks out, and seeing a better country, sets sail. Progress is the realization of utopias. What is the difference between scandal and gossip? Oh, gossip is charming. History is merely gossip, but scandal is gossip made tedious by morality. All beautiful things belong to the same age. It is personalities, not principles, that move the age. Modern pictures are, no doubt, delightful to look at. At least, some of them are. But they are quite impossible to live with. They are too clever, too assertive, too intellectual. Their meaning is too obvious, and their method too clearly defined. One exhausts what they have to say in a very short time, and then they become as tedious as one's relations. To know nothing about our great men is one of the necessary elements of English education. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. Modern life would be very tedious if it were either, and modern literature a complete impossibility. You may laugh, but it is a great thing to come across a woman who thoroughly understands one. The majority of people spoil their lives by an unhealthy and exaggerated altruism. The number of women in London who flirt with their own husbands is perfectly scandalous. It looks so bad. It is simply washing one's clean linen in public. The chief thing that makes life a failure from the artistic point of view is the thing that lends to life its sordid security, the fact that one can never repeat exactly the same emotion. We teach people how to remember. We never teach them how to grow. Vulgar habit that people have nowadays of asking one, after one has given them an idea, whether one is serious or not. Nothing is serious except passion. The intellect is not a serious thing, and never has been. It is an instrument on which one plays, that is all. The only serious form of intellect I know is the British intellect, and on the British intellect the illiterate always plays the drum. It is absurd to divide people into good and bad. People are either charming or tedious. It is only the modern that ever become old-fashioned. It is only the Philistine who seeks to estimate a personality by the vulgar test of production. Musical people are so absurdly unreasonable. They always want one to be perfectly dumb at the very moment when one is longing to be absolutely deaf. Nothing is so dangerous as being too modern. one is apt to grow old-fashioned quite suddenly. The fact of a man being a poisoner is nothing against his prose. The domestic virtues are not the true basis of art. To the philosopher, women represent the triumph of matter over mind, just as men represent the triumph of mind over morals. The only way a woman can ever reform a man is by boring him so completely that he loses all possible interest in life. The only horrible thing in the world is ennui. That is the one sin for which there is no forgiveness. French songs I cannot possibly allow. People always seem to think that they are improper, and either look shocked, which is vulgar, or laugh, which is worse. It has often been made a subject of reproach against artists and men of letters that they are lacking in wholeness and completeness of nature. As a rule, this must necessarily be so. That very concentration of vision and inversity of purpose, which is the characteristic of the artistic temperament, is in itself a mode of limitation. To those who are preoccupied with the beauty of form, nothing else seems of so much importance. The work of art is to dominate the spectator. The spectator is not to dominate the work of art. One should sympathize with the joy, the beauty, the color of life. The less said about life soars, the better. You can't make people good by an act of parliament. That is something. Art creates an incomparable and unique effect, and having done so passes on to other things. Nature, on the other hand, forgetting that imitation can be made the sincerest form of insult, keeps on repeating the effect until we have become absolutely wearied of it. It is perfectly monstrous the way people go about nowadays, saying things against one behind one's back that are absolutely and entirely true. A true artist takes no notice whatever of the public. The public are to him non-existent. One should never trust a woman who tells one her real age. A woman who would tell one that would tell one anything. Nothing is so aggravating as calmness. There is something positively brutal about the good temper of most modern men. I wonder we women stand for it as well as we do. The truth is a thing I get rid of as soon as possible. Bad habit, by the way, makes one very unpopular at the club, with the older members. They call it being conceited. Perhaps it is. My own business always bores me to death. I prefer other people's. Don't be led astray into the paths of virtue. That is the worst of women. They always want one to be quite good. And if we are good, when they meet us they don't love us at all. They like to find us quite irretrievably bad and to leave us quite unattractively good. Men are such cowards. They outrage every law in the world and are afraid of the world's tongue. Wicked women bother one. Good women bore one. That is the only difference between them. To know the principle of the highest art is to know the principles of all the arts. I don't believe in the existence of Puritan women. I don't think there is a woman in the world who would not be a little flattered if one made love to her. It is that which makes women so irresistibly adorable. When I am in trouble, eating is the only thing that consoles me. Indeed, when I am in really great trouble, as anyone who knows me intimately will tell you, I refuse everything except food and drink. When one is going to lead an entirely new life, one requires regular and wholesome meals. The soul is born of old, but grows young. That is the comedy of life. The body is born young and grows old. That is life's tragedy. One can survive everything nowadays except death, and live down anything except a good reputation. The past is of no importance. The present is of no importance. It is with the future that we have to deal. For the past is what men should not have been. The present is what men ought not to be. The future is what artists are. Men become old, but they never become good. By persistently remaining single, a man converts himself into a permanent public temptation. Men should be more careful. This very celibacy leads weaker vessels astray. I think that in practical life there is something about success, actual success, that is a little unscrupulous, something about ambition that is scrupulous always. Every man of ambition has to fight his century with its own weapons. What this century worships is wealth. The god of this century is wealth. To succeed, one must have wealth. At all costs, one must have wealth. I love scandals about other people, but scandals about myself don't interest me. They have not got the charm of novelty. Moderation is a fatal thing. Enough is as bad as a meal. More than enough is as good as a feast. The English can't stand a man who is always saying he is in the right, but they are very fond of a man who admits he has been in the wrong. It is one of the best things in them. Life is simply a bad quarter of an hour made up of exquisite moments. There is the same world for all of us, and good and evil and innocence go through it hand in hand. To shut one's eyes to half of life that one may live securely is as though one blinded oneself that one might walk with more safety in a land of pit and precipice. Married men are horribly tedious when they are good husbands, and abominably conceited when they are not. Between men and women there is no friendship possible. There is passion, enmity, worship, love, but no friendship. Everybody is clever nowadays. You can't go anywhere without meeting clever people. This has become an absolute public nuisance. I don't think man has much capacity for development. He has got as far as he can, and that is not far, is it? I am not quite sure that I quite know what pessimism really means. All I do know is that life cannot be understood much without charity, cannot be lived without much charity. It is love, and not German philosophy, that is the explanation of this world, whatever may be the explanation of the next. I do not approve of anything that tampers with natural arrogance. Ignorance is like a delicate exotic fruit. Touch it, and the blossom is gone. The whole theory of modern education is radically unsound. Fortunately, in England at any rate, education produces no effect whatsoever. If it did, it would prove a serious danger to the upper classes, and probably lead to acts of violence in Grosvenor Square. No woman should ever be quite accurate about her age. It looks so calculating. Emotion for the sake of emotion is the aim of art, and emotion for the sake of emotion is the aim of life and of that practical organization of life that we call society. Men of the noblest possible moral character are extremely susceptible to the influence of the physical charms of others. Modern, no less than ancient history supplies us with many most painful examples of what I refer to. If it were not so, indeed history would be quite unreadable. I am not in favor of long engagements. They give people the opportunity of finding out each other's character before marriage, which I think is never advisable. It is a terrible thing for a man to find out suddenly that all his life he has been speaking nothing but the truth. The two weak points in our age are its want of principle and its want of profile. 35 is a very attractive age. London society is full of women who have of their own free choice remained 35 for years. Never speak disrespectfully of society. Only people who can't get into it do that. It is always painful to part with people whom one has known for a very brief space of time. The absence of old friends one can endure with equanimity. But even a momentary separation from anyone to whom one has just been introduced is almost unbearable. To be natural is to be obvious. and to be obvious is to be inartistic. One is tempted to define man as a rational animal who always loses his temper when he is called upon to act in accordance with the dictates of reason. The essence of thought, as the essence of life, is growth. What people call insincerity is simply a method by which we can multiply our personalities. In a temple, everyone should be serious except the thing that is worshipped. We are never more true to ourselves than when we are inconsistent. There is always something ridiculous about the emotions of people whom one has ceased to love. Intellectual generalities are always interesting, but generalities in morals mean absolutely nothing. To be in society is merely a bore, but to be out of it simply a tragedy. We live in an age when unnecessary things are our only necessities. One should never make one's debut with a scandal. One should reserve that to give an interest to one's old age. What man has sought for is indeed neither pain nor pleasure, but simply life. Man has sought to live intensely, fully, perfectly. When he can do so without exercising restraint on others, or suffering it ever, and his activities are all pleasurable to him, he will be saner, healthier, more civilized, more himself. Pleasure is nature's test, her sign of approval. When man is happy, he is in harmony with himself and his environment. Society often forgives the criminal. It never forgives the dreamer. It is so easy for people to have sympathy with suffering. It is so difficult for them to have sympathy with thought. Conversation should touch on everything, that should concentrate itself on nothing. There is a luxury in self-reproach. When we blame ourselves, we feel that no one else has a right to blame us. It is the confession, not the priest, that gives us absolution. There are only two kinds of people who are really fascinating. People who know absolutely everything, and people who know absolutely nothing. The public is wonderfully tolerant. It forgives everything except genius. Life makes us pay too high a price for its wares, and we purchase the meanest of its secrets at a cost that is monstrous and infinite. This horrid House of Commons quite ruins our husbands for us. I think the lower house by far the greatest blow to a happy married life that there has been since that terrible thing that they called the higher education of women was invented. Once a man begins to neglect his domestic duties, he becomes painfully effeminate, does he not? And I don't like that. It makes men so very attractive. Experience is a question of instinct about life. What is true about art is true about life. One can always be kind to people about whom one cares nothing. I like men who have a future and women who have a past. Women, as some witty Frenchmen put it, inspire us with the desire to do masterpieces and always prevent us from carrying them out. In matters of grave importance, style, not sincerity, is the vital thing. The only way to behave to a woman is to make love to her if she is pretty, and to someone else if she is plain. Women give to men the very gold of their lives, possibly, but they invariably want it back in such very small change. Define women as a sex. Sphinxes without secrets. What do you call a bad man? The sort of man who admires innocence. What do you call a bad woman? Oh, the sort of woman a man never gets tired of. One can resist everything except temptation. Don't let us go to life for our fulfillment or our experience. It is a thing narrowed by circumstances, incoherent in its utterance, and without that fine correspondence or form and spirit which is the only thing that can satisfy the artistic and critical temperament. It is a dangerous thing to reform anyone. One can always know at once whether a man has home claims upon his life or not. I have noticed a very, very sad expression in the eyes of so many married men. A mother who doesn't part with a daughter every season has no real affection. To be good is to be in harmony with oneself. Discord is to be forced to be in harmony with others. A really grand passion is comparatively rare nowadays. It is the privilege of people who have nothing to do. That is the one use of the idle classes in a country. There is no secret of life. Life's aim, if it has one, is simply to be always looking for temptations. There are not nearly enough of them. I sometimes pass a whole day without coming across a single one. It is quite dreadful. It makes one so nervous about the future. All thought is immoral. Its very essence is destruction. If you think of anything, you kill it. Nothing survives being thought of. What is truth? In matters of religion, it is simply the opinion that has survived. In matters of science, it is the ultimate sensation. In matters of art, it is one's last mood. It is so easy to convert others. It is so difficult to convert oneself. A little sincerity is a dangerous thing, and a great deal of it is absolutely fatal. Life cheats us with shadows, like a puppet master. We ask it for pleasure. It gives it to us with bitterness and disappointment in its train. We come across some noble grief that we think will lend the purple dignity of tragedy to our days, but it passes away from us, and things less noble take its place, and on some gray, windy dawn or odorous eve of silence and of silver, we find ourselves looking with callous wonder, or dull heart of stone, at the tress of gold-flecked hair that we had once so wildly worshipped and so madly kissed. There are two ways of disliking art. One is to dislike it, and the other is to like it rationally. There is nothing sane about the worship of beauty. It is too splendid to be sane. Those of whose lives it forms the dominant note will always seem to the world to be mere visionaries. I am afraid that good people do a great deal of harm in this world. Certainly the greatest harm they do is that they make badness of such extraordinary importance. A sentimentalist is a man who sees an absurd value in everything and doesn't know the market price of any single thing. Punctuality is the thief of time. Self-culture is the true ideal for man. There's nothing in the world like the devotion of a married woman. It's a thing no married man knows anything about. No woman should have a memory. Memory in a woman is the beginning of dowdiness. One can always tell from a woman's bonnet whether she has got a memory or not. There are things that are right to say, but that may be said at the wrong time and to the wrong people. The meaning of any beautiful created thing is at least as much in the soul of him who looks at it as it was in the soul who wrought it. Nay, it is rather the beholder who lends the beautiful thing its myriad meanings, and makes it marvelous for us, and sets it in some new relation to the age, so that it becomes a vital portion of our lives, and a symbol of what we pray for, or perhaps of what, having prayed for, we fear that we may receive. The Renaissance was great because it sought to solve no social problem, and busied itself not about such things, but suffered the individual to develop freely, beautifully and naturally, and so had great and individual artists and great and individual men. In England, people actually try to be brilliant at breakfast. That is so dreadful of them. Only dull people are brilliant at breakfast. When one is in love, one begins by deceiving oneself, and ends by deceiving others. That is what the world calls a romance. The secret of life is never to have an emotion that is unbecoming. No artist is ever morbid. The artist can express everything. The development of the race depends on the development of the individual, and where self-culture has ceased to be, the ideal, the intellectual standard is instantly lowered and often ultimately lost. An idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. To elope is cowardly. It is running away from danger, and danger has become so rare in modern life. When a man is old enough to do wrong, he should be old enough to do right also. The book of life begins with a man and a woman in a garden, and ends with revelations. In married life, 3 is company, and 2 is none. Out of ourselves we can never pass, nor can there be in creation what in the Creator was not. Don't tell me that you have exhausted life. When a man says that, one knows that life has exhausted him. When a woman marries again, it is because she detested her first husband. When a man marries again, it is because he adored his first wife. Women try their luck. Men risk theirs. The highest criticism, really, is the record of one's own soul. It is more fascinating than history, as it is concerned simply with oneself. It is more delightful than philosophy, as its subject is concrete and not abstract, real and not vague. It is the only civilized form of autobiography, as it deals not with the events, but with the thoughts of one's life, not with life's physical accidents of deed or circumstance, but with the spiritual moods and imaginative passions of the mind. To know anything about oneself, one must know all about others. Duty is what one expects from others. It is not what one does oneself. After a good dinner, one can forgive anybody, even one's own relations. Talk to every woman as if you loved her, and to every man as if he bored you, and at the end of your first season you will have the reputation of possessing the most perfect social tact. Man, poor, awkward, reliable, necessary man, belongs to a sex that has been rational for millions and millions of years. He can't help himself. It is in his race. The history of women is very different. They have always been picturesque protests against the mere existence of common sense. They saw its dangers from the first. More marriages are ruined nowadays by the common sense of the husband than by anything else. How can a woman be expected to be happy with a man who insists on treating her as if she were a perfectly rational being? It is very vulgar to talk about one's business. Only people like stockbrokers do that, and then merely at dinner parties. It is awfully hard work doing nothing. However, I don't mind hard work when there is no definite object of any kind. To do nothing at all is the most difficult thing in the world, the most difficult and the most intellectual. To Plato, with his passion for wisdom, this was the noblest form of energy. To Aristotle, with his passion for knowledge, this was the noblest form of energy also. It was to this that the passion for holiness led the saint and the mystic of medieval days. Youth. There is nothing like it. It is absurd to talk of the ignorance of youth. The only people to whose opinions I listen now with any respect are persons much younger than myself. They seem in front of me. Life has revealed to them her latest wonder. Romance lives by repetition, and repetition converts an appetite into an art. I adore simple pleasures. They are the last refuge of the complex. There is nothing like youth. The middle-aged are mortgaged to life. The old are in life's lumber room. But youth is the lord of life. Youth has a kingdom waiting for it. Everyone is born a king, and most people die in exile, like most kings. All crime is vulgar, just as all vulgarity is crime. Society, Civilized society, at least, is never very ready to believe anything to the detriment of those who are both rich and fascinating. It instinctively feels that manners are of more importance than morals, and in its opinion the highest respectability is of much less value than the possession of a good chef. And after all, it is a very poor consolation to be told that the man who has given one a bad dinner or poor wine is irreproachable in his private life. Even the cardinal virtues cannot atone for half-cold entrees. While in the opinion of society, contemplation is the gravest thing of which any citizen can be guilty, in the opinion of the highest culture, it is the proper occupation of man. Life is terribly deficient in form. Its catastrophes happen in the wrong way and to the wrong people. There is a grotesque horror about its comedies, and its tragedies seem to culminate in farce. One is always wounded when one approaches it. Things last either too long or not long enough. If a woman wants to hold a man, she has merely to appeal to what is worst in him. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. Beauty has many meanings as man has moods. It is the symbol of symbols. It reveals everything because it expresses nothing. When it shows us itself, it shows us the whole fiery-colored world. Men always want to be a woman's first love. That is their clumsy vanity. Women have a more subtle instinct about things. What they like is to be a man's last romance. Anything approaching to the free play of the mind is practically unknown amongst us. People cry out against the sinner, yet it is not the sinful, but the stupid who are our shame. There is no sin except stupidity. One regrets the loss even of one's worst habits. Perhaps one regrets them the most. They are such an essential part of one's personality. It is through art, and through art only, that we can realize our perfection. Through art, and through art only, that we can shield ourselves from the sordid perils of actual existence. A man who can dominate a London dinner table can dominate the world. The future belongs to the dandy. It is the exquisites who are going to rule. It often happens that the real tragedies of life occur in such an inartistic manner that they hurt us by their crude violence, their absolute incoherence, their absurd want of meaning, their entire lack of style. They affect us just as the vulgarity affects us. They give us an impression of sheer brute force, and we revolt against that. Sometimes, however, a tragedy that possesses artistic elements of beauty crosses our lives. If these elements of beauty are real, the whole thing simply appeals to our sense of dramatic effect. Suddenly, we find that we are no longer the actors, but the spectators of the play. Or rather, we are both. We watch ourselves, and the mere wonder of the spectacle enthralls us. When a woman finds out that her husband is absolutely indifferent to her, she either becomes dreadfully dowdy or wears very smart bonnets that some other woman's husband has to pay for. It is immoral to use private property in order to alleviate the horrible evils that result from the institution of private property. It is a mistake to think that the passion one feels in creation is ever really shown in the work one creates. Art is always more abstract than we fancy. Form and color tell us of form and color. That is all. It is sometimes said that the tragedy of an artist's life is that he cannot realize his ideal. But the true tragedy that dogs the steps of most artists is that they realize their ideal too absolutely. For when the ideal is realized, it is robbed of its wonder and its mystery, and becomes simply a new starting point for an ideal that is other than itself. People who go in for being consistent have just as many moods as others have. The only difference is that their moods are rather meaningless. It is only shallow people who require years to get rid of an emotion. A man who is master of himself can end a sorrow as easily as he can invent a pleasure. Good women have such a limited view of life. Their horizon is so small their interests so petty. The fact is that they are not modern, and to be modern is the only thing worth being nowadays. Discontent is the first step in the progress of a man or a nation. Men marry because they are tired, women because they are curious. Both are disappointed. All men are married women's property. That is the only true definition of what married women's property really is. I am not in favor of this modern mania for turning bad people into good people at a moment's notice. As a man sows, let him reap. Nothing refines but the intellect. It is very painful for me to be forced to speak the truth. It is the first time in my life that I have ever been reduced to such a painful position, and I am really quite inexperienced in doing anything of the kind. The man who regards his past is a man who deserves to have no future to look forward to. Just as it is only by contact with the art of foreign nations that the art of a country gains that individual and separate life that we call nationality, so by curious inversion, it is only by intensifying his own personality that the critic can interpret the personality of others. And the more strongly this personality enters into the interpretation, the more real the interpretation becomes, the more satisfying, the more convincing, and the more true. Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth. All women become like their mothers. That is their tragedy. No man does. That is his. Women are a fascinatingly willful sex. Every woman is a rebel, and usually in wild revolt against herself. One should always be in love. That is the reason one should never marry. No man came across two ideal things. Few come across one. To become the spectator of one's own life is to escape the suffering of life. The state is to make what is useful. The individual is to make what is beautiful. A community is infinitely more brutalized by the habitual employment of punishment than it is by the occasional occurrence of crime. The systems that fail are those that rely on the permanency of human nature and not on its growth and development. Jealousy, which is an extraordinary source of crime in modern life, is an emotion closely bound up with our conceptions of property, and under socialism and individualism will die out. It is remarkable that in communistic tribes, jealousy is entirely unknown. All art is immoral. He to whom the present is the only thing that is present knows nothing of the age in which he lives. To realize the 19th century, one must realize every century that has preceded it, and that has contributed to its making. Few parents nowadays pay any regard to what their children say to them. The old-fashioned respect for the young is fast dying out. The history of woman is the history of the worst form of tyranny the world has ever known, the tyranny of the weak over the strong. It is the only tyranny that lasts. The happiness of a married man depends on the people he has not married. There is no type for man. There are as many perfections as there are imperfect men. And while to the claims of charity a man may yield and yet be free, to the claims of conformity no man may yield and remain free at all. A practical scheme is either a scheme that is already in existence or a scheme that could be carried out under existing conditions. All imitation in morals and in life is wrong. The world has been made by fools, that wise men may live in it. Women love us for our defects. If we have enough of them, they will forgive us everything, even our gigantic intellects. Society is a necessary thing. No man has any real success in this world unless he has got women to back him, and women rule society. If you have not got women on your side, you are quite over. You might just as well be a barrister or a stockbroker or a journalist at once. The worship of the senses has often, and with much justice, been decried, men feeling a natural instinct of terror about passions and sensations that seem stronger than themselves, and that they are conscious of sharing with the less highly organized forms of existence. But it is probable the true nature of the senses has never been understood, and that they have remained savage and animal merely because the world has sought to starve them into submission or to kill them by pain, instead of aiming at making them elements of a new spirituality, of which a fine instinct for beauty will be the dominant characteristic. Women appreciate cruelty more than anything else. They have wonderfully primitive instincts. We have emancipated them, but they remain slaves, looking for their masters all the same. They love being dominated. Those who try to lead the people can only do so by following the mob. It is through the voice of one crying in the wilderness that the way of the gods must be prepared. Circumstances are the lashes laid onto us by life. Some of us have to receive them with bared ivory backs, and others are permitted to keep on a coat. That is the only difference. Criticism is itself an art. It is no more to be judged by any low standard of imitation or resemblance than is the work of poet or sculptor. The critic occupies the same relation to the work of art that he criticizes as the artist does to the visible world of form and color or the unseen world of passion and thought. He does not even require for the perfection of his art the finest materials. Anything will serve his purpose. It is very much more difficult to talk about a thing than to do it. In the sphere of actual life, that is, of course, obvious. Anybody can make history. Only a great man can write it. If we lived long enough to see the results of our actions, it may be that those who call themselves good would be filled with a wild remorse, and those whom the world calls evil stirred with a noble joy. Each little thing that we do passes into the great machine of life, which may grind our virtues to powder, and make them worthless, or transform our sins into elements of a new civilization more marvelous and more splendid than any that has gone before. Children begin by loving their parents. As they grow older, they judge them. Sometimes they forgive them. We live in an age that reads too much to be wise, and that thinks too much to be beautiful. One should absorb the color of life, but one should never remember its details. Details are always vulgar. It will be a marvelous thing, the true personality of man, when we see it. It will grow naturally and simply flower-like, or as a tree grows. It will not be at discord. It will never argue or dispute. It will not prove things. It will know everything, and yet it will not busy itself about knowledge. It will have wisdom. Its value will not be measured by material things. It will have nothing, and yet it will have everything. And whatever one takes from it, it will still have. So rich it will be. It will not always be meddling with others or asking them to be like itself. It will love them because they will be different. And yet, while it will not meddle with others, it will help all, as a beautiful thing helps us by being what it is. The personality of man will be very wonderful. It will be as wonderful as the personality of a child. Cynicism is merely the art of seeing things as they are instead of as they ought to be. 3 addresses always inspire confidence, even in tradesmen. If one doesn't talk about a thing, it has never happened. It is simply expression that gives reality to things. No man is able who is unable to get on, just as no woman is clever who can't succeed in obtaining that worst and most necessary of evils, a husband. The one charm of the past is that it is the past, but women never know when the curtain has fallen. They always want a 6th act, and as soon as the interest of the play is entirely over, they propose to continue it. If they were allowed their way, every comedy would have a tragic ending, and every tragedy would culminate in a farce. They are charmingly artificial, but they have no sense of art. Each time that one loves is the only time that one has ever loved. Difference of object does not alter singleness of passion, it merely intensifies it. The real tragedy of the poor is that they can afford nothing but self-denial. Beautiful sins, like beautiful things, are the privilege of the rich. Human life is the one thing worth investigating. Compared to it, there is nothing else of any value. It is true that as one watches life in its curious crucible of pain and pleasure, one cannot wear over one's face a mask of glass, nor keep the sulphurous fumes from troubling the brain and making the imagination turbid with monstrous fancies and misshapen dreams. There are poisons so subtle that to know their properties one has to sicken of them. There are maladies so strange that one has to pass through them if one seeks to understand their nature. And yet what a great reward one receives. How wonderful the whole world becomes to one. To note the curious, hard logic of passion and the emotional, colored life of the intellect, to observe where they meet and where they separate, at what point they are in unison and at what point they are in discord, there is a delight in that. What matter what the cost is? One can never pay too high a price for any sensation. There is only one class in the community that thinks more about money than the rich, and that is the poor. The poor can think of nothing else. That is the misery of being poor. To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all. Personality is a very mysterious thing. A man cannot always be estimated by what he does. He may keep the law and yet be worthless. He may break the law and yet be fine. He may be bad without ever doing anything bad. He may commit a sin against society and yet realize through that sin his true perfection. Medieval art is charming, but medieval emotions are out of date. One can use them in fiction, of course, but then the only things that one can use in fiction are the only things that one has ceased to use in fact. Man is complete in himself. What is a cynic? A man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's the old story. Love, well, not at first sight, but love at the end of the season, which is so much more satisfactory. No nice girl should ever waltz with such particularly younger sons. It looks so fast. Good resolutions are useless attempts to interfere with scientific laws. Their origin is pure vanity. Their result is absolutely nil. They give us now and then some of those luxurious sterile emotions that have a certain charm for the weak. That is all that can be said for them. They are simply checks that men draw on a bank where they have no account. What is the difference between literature and journalism? Journalism is unreadable, and literature is unread. I hope you have not been leading a double life, pretending to be wicked and really being good all the time. That would be hypocrisy. My husband is a sort of promissory note. I am tired of meeting him. Conscience makes egotists of us all. Never trust a woman who wears mauve, whatever her age may be, or a woman over 35 who is fond of pink ribbons. It always means that they have a history. There is a fatality about good resolutions. They are always made too late. We can have in life but one great experience at best, and the secret of life is to reproduce that experience as often as possible. Anybody can be good in the country. There are no temptations there. That is the reason why people who live out of town are absolutely uncivilized. Civilization is not by any means an easy thing to attain to. There are only two ways by which man can reach it. One is by being cultured, the other by being corrupt. Country people have no opportunity of being either, so they stagnate. What nonsense people talk about happy marriages. A man can be happy with any woman so long as he does not love her. The things one feels absolutely certain about are never true. That is the fatality of faith and the lesson of romance. In the common world of fact, the wicked are not punished, nor the good rewarded. Success is given to the strong, failure thrust upon the weak. Nothing should be able to harm a man except himself. Nothing should be able to rob a man at all. What a man really has is what is in him. What is outside of him should be a matter of no importance. Modern morality consists in accepting the standard of one's age. I consider that for any man of culture to accept the standard of his age is a form of the grossest immorality. Perplexity and mistrust fan affection into passion, and so bring about those beautiful tragedies that alone make life worth living. Women once felt this, while men did not, and so women once ruled the world. Sin is a thing that writes itself across a man's face. It cannot be concealed. People talk sometimes of secret vices. There are no such things. If a wretched man has a vice, it shows itself in the lines of his mouth, the drops of his eyelids, the molding of his hands even. There are sins whose fascination is more in the memory than in the doing of them, strange triumphs that gratify the pride more than the passions, and give to the intellect a quickened sense of joy, greater than they can bring or can ever bring to the senses. No civilized man ever regrets a pleasure, and no uncivilized man ever knows what a pleasure is. As for a spoiled life, no life is spoiled but one whose growth is arrested. If you want to mar a nature, you have merely to reform it. Socialism itself will be of value simply because it will lead to individualism. Some years ago, people went about the country saying that property has duties. It is perfectly true. Property not only has duties, but it has so many duties that its possession to any large extent is a bore. If property had simply pleasures, we could stand it, but its duties make it unbearable. It is through joy that the individualism of the future will develop itself. Christ made no attempt to reconstruct society, and consequently the individualism that he preached to man could be realized only through pain or in solitude. Most people become bankrupt through having invested too heavily in the prose of life. To have ruined oneself over poetry is an honor. The only artists I have ever known who are personally delightful are bad artists. Good artists exist simply on what they make, and consequently are perfectly uninteresting in what they are. What are the virtues? Nature, Renan tells us, cares little about chastity, and it may be that it is to the shame of the Magdalene, and not to their own purity, that the Lucretius of modern life owes their freedom from stain. Charity, as even those whose religion it makes a formal part have been compelled to acknowledge, creates a multitude of evils. The mere existence of conscience, that faculty of which people prate so much nowadays, and are so ignorantly proud, is a sign of our imperfect development. It must be merged in instinct before we become fine. Self-denial is simply a method by which man arrests his progress, and self-sacrifice a survival of the mutilation of the savage, part of that old worship of pain which is so terrible a factor in the history of the world, and which even now makes its victims day by day and has its altars in the land. Virtues. Who knows what virtues are? Not you, not I, not anyone. It is well for our vanity that we slay the criminal, for if we suffered him to live, he might show us what we had gained by his crime. It is well for his peace that the saint goes to his martyrdom. He is spared the sight of the horror of his harvest. Nowadays, all the married men live like bachelors, and all the bachelors like married men. The higher education of men is what I should like to see. Men need it so sadly. The world is perfectly packed with good women. To know them is a middle-class education. Hesitation of any kind is a sign of mental decay in the young, of physical weakness in the old. Our husbands never appreciate anything in us. We have to go to others for that. Most women in London nowadays seem to furnish their rooms with nothing but orchids, foreigners, and French novels. The canons of good society are, or should be, the same as the canons of art. Form is absolutely essential to it. It should have the dignity of a ceremony as well as its unreality, and should combine the insincere character of a romantic play with the wit and beauty that makes such plays delightful to us. Is sincerity such a terrible thing? I think not. It is merely a method by which we can multiply our personalities. The tragedy of old age is not that one is old, but that one is young. A great poet, a really great poet, is the most unpoetical of all creatures. But inferior poets are absolutely fascinating. The worse their rhymes are, the more picturesque they look. The mere fact of having published a book of second-rate sonnets makes a man quite irresistible. He lives the poetry that he cannot write. The others write the poetry that they dare not realize. Being adored is a nuisance. Women treat us as humanity treats its gods. They worship us and are always bothering us to do something for them. If a man treats life artistically, his brain is his heart. The quote-unquote peerage is the one book a young man about town should know thoroughly, and it is the best thing in fiction the English have ever done. The world has always laughed at its own tragedies, that being the only way in which it has been able to bear them. Consequently, whatever the world has treated seriously belongs to the comedy side of things. The only difference between the saint and the sinner is that every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. What is termed sin is an essential element of progress. Without it, the world would stagnate or grow old or become colorless. By its curiosity, it increases the experience of the race. Through its intensified assertion of individualism, it saves us from the commonplace. In its rejection of the current notions about morality, it is one with the higher ethics. Formerly, we used to canonize our heroes. The modern method is to vulgarize them. Cheap editions of great books may be delightful, but cheap editions of great men are absolutely detestable. Individualism does not come to man with any claims upon him at all. It comes naturally and inevitably out of man. It is the point to which all development tends. It is the differentiation to which all organisms grow. It is the perfection that is inherent in every mode of life, and toward which every mode of life quickens. Individualism exercises no compulsion over man. On the contrary, it says to man that he should suffer no compulsion to be exercised over him. It does not try to force people to be good. It knows that people are good when they are let alone. Man will develop individualism out of himself. Man is now so developing individualism. To ask whether individualism is practical is like asking whether evolution is practical. Evolution is the law of life, and there is no evolution except towards individualism. The longer I live, the more keenly I feel that whatever was good enough for our fathers is not good enough for us. In art, as in politics, the grandfathers are always wrong. No woman is a genius. Women are a decorative sex. They never have anything to say, but they say it charmingly. Humanity takes itself too seriously. It is the world's original sin. If the cavemen had known how to laugh, history would have been different. I wonder who it was defined man as a rational animal. It was the most premature definition ever given. Man is many things, but he is not rational. Thought and language are to the artist instruments of an art. To get into the best society nowadays, one has either to feed people, amuse people, or shock people. That is all. You should never try to understand women. Women are pictures, men are problems. If you want to know what a woman really means, which, by the way, is always a dangerous thing to do, look at her. Don't listen to her. Ordinary women never appeal to one's imagination. They are limited to their century. No glamour ever transfigures them. One knows their minds as easily as one knows their bonnets. One can always find them. There is no mystery in any of them. They ride in the park in the morning and chatter at tea parties in the afternoon. They have their stereotyped smile and their fashionable mauve. Don't run down dyed hair and painted faces. There is an extraordinary charm in them, sometimes. To have been well brought up is a great drawback nowadays. It shuts one out from so much. The people who have adored me, there have not been very many, but there have been some, have always insisted on living on long after I had ceased to care for them, or they to care for me. They have become stout and tedious, and when I meet them, they go in at once for reminiscences. That awful memory of women, what a fearful thing it is, and what an utter intellectual stagnation it reveals. Examinations are pure humbug from beginning to end. If a man is a gentleman, he knows quite enough, and if he is not a gentleman, whatever he knows is bad for him. Credit is the capital of a younger son, and he can live charmingly on it. The object of art is not simply truth, but complex beauty. Art itself is really a form of exaggeration, and selection, which is the very spirit of art, is nothing more than the intensified mode of overemphasis. The popular cry of our time is, "Let us return to life and nature." They will recreate art for us and send the red blood coursing through her veins. They will shoe her feet with swiftness and make her hands strong. But alas, we are mistaken in our amiable and well-meant efforts. Nature is always behind the age. And as for life, she is the solvent that breaks up art, the enemy that lays waste her house. There are only two kinds of women, the plain and the colored. The plain women are very useful. If you want to gain a reputation for respectability, you have merely to take them down to supper. The other women are very charming. They commit one mistake, however. They paint in order to try and look young. The way of paradoxes is the way of truth. To test reality, we must see it on the tightrope. When the verities become acrobats, we can judge them. Life imitates art far more than art imitates life. The Greeks, with their quick, artistic instinct, understood this, and set in the bride's chamber the statue of Hermes or of Apollo, that she might bear children as lovely as the works of art that she looked at in her rapture or her pain. They knew that life gains from art not merely spirituality, depth of thought and feeling, soul turmoil or soul peace, but that she can form herself on the very lines and colors of art, and can reproduce the dignity of Pheidias as well as the grace of Praxiteles. Hence came this objection to realism. They disliked it on purely social grounds. They felt that it inevitably makes people ugly, and they were perfectly right. Faithfulness is to the emotional life what consistency is to the life of the intellect, simply a confession of failure. There are many things that we would throw away if we were not afraid that others might pick them up. What a fuss people make about fidelity. Why, even in love it is purely a question for physiology. It has nothing to do with our own will. Young men want to be faithful and are not. Old men want to be faithless and cannot. That is all one can say. Modernity of form and modernity of subject matter are entirely and absolutely wrong. We have mistaken the common livery of the age for the vesture of the muses, and spent our days in the sordid streets and hideous suburbs of our vile cities, when we should be out on the hillside with Apollo. Certainly we are a degraded race, and have sold our birthright for a mess of facts. Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, just as nothing can cure the senses but the soul. I can stand brute force, but brute reason is quite unbearable. There is something unfair about its use. It is hitting below the intellect. Those who live in marble or on painted panel know of life but a single exquisite instant, eternal indeed in its beauty, but limited to one note of passion or one mood of calm. Those whom the poet makes live have their myriad emotions of joy and terror, of courage and despair, of pleasure and of suffering. The seasons come and go in glad or saddening pageant, and with winged or leaden feet the years pass by before them. They have their youth and their manhood, they are children and they grow old. It is always dawn for St. Helena, as Berenice saw her at the window. Through the still morning air the angels bring her the symbol of God's pain. The cool breezes of the morning lift the gilt threads from her brow. On that little hill by the city of Florence, where the lovers of Giorgione are lying, it is always the solstice of noon. Of noon, made so languorous by summer suns that hardly can the slim, naked girl dip into the marble tank, the round bubble of clear glass. The long fingers of the lute-player rest idly upon the chords. It is twilight always for the dancing nymphs, whom Corot set free from the silver poplars of France. In eternal twilight they move, those frail diaphanous figures, whose tremulous white feet seem not to touch the dew-drenched grass they tread on. But those who walk in epos, drama, or romance see through the laboring months the young moons wax and wane, and watch the night from the evening into morning star, and from sunrise into sun setting can note the shifting day with all its gold and shadow. For them, as for us, the flowers bloom and wither, and the earth, that green-tressed goddess, as Coleridge calls her, alters her raiment for their pleasure. The statue is concentrated to one moment of perfection. The image stained upon the canvas possesses no spiritual element of growth or change. If they know nothing of death, it is because they know little of life, for the secrets of life and death belong to those, and to those only whom the sequence of time affects, and who possess not merely the present but the future, and can rise or fall from a past of glory or of shame. Movement, that problem of the visible arts, can be truly realized in literature alone. It is literature that shows us the body in its swiftness and the soul in its unrest. Behind every exquisite thing that exists, there is something tragic. Worlds have to be in travail that the merest flower may blow. Beauty is a form of genius, is higher indeed than genius, as it needs no explanation. It is one of the great facts of the world, like sunlight or springtime, or the reflection in dark water of that silver shell we call the moon. It cannot be questioned. It has its divine right of sovereignty. The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Resist it, and your soul grows sick with longing for the things it has forbidden to itself. Women spoil every romance by trying to make it last forever. He's sure to be a wonderful success. He thinks like a Tory and talks like a radical, and that's so important nowadays. Nowadays, to be intelligible is to be found out. We make gods of men and they leave us. Others make brutes of them and they fawn and are faithful. The husbands of very beautiful women belong to the criminal classes. To me, beauty is the wonder of wonders. It is only shallow people who do not judge by appearances. The true mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible. The thoroughly well-informed man is the modern ideal. In the mind of the thoroughly well-informed man is a dreadful thing. It is like a bric-a-brac shop, all monsters and dust, with everything priced above its proper value. Women have no appreciation of good looks in men. At least good women have none. To influence a person is to give him one's own soul. He does not think his natural thoughts or burn with his natural passions. His virtues are not real to him. His sins, if there are such things as sins, are borrowed. He becomes an echo of someone else's music, an actor of a part that has not been written for him. Those who are faithful know only of the trivial side of love. It is the faithless who know of love's tragedies. An artist should create beautiful things, but should put nothing of his own life into them. We live in an age when men treat art as if it were meant to be a form of autobiography. We have lost the abstract sense of beauty. A man cannot be too careful in the choice of his enemies. I have not got one who is a fool. They are all men of some intellectual power, and consequently they all appreciate me. The value of an idea has nothing whatever to do with the sincerity of the man who expresses it. I like persons better than principles, and I like persons with no principles better than anything else in the world. He who would lead a Christ-like life is he who is perfectly and absolutely himself. He may be a great poet, or a great man of science, or a young student at the university, or one who watches sheep upon a moor, or a maker of dramas, like Shakespeare, or a thinker about God, like Spinoza, or a child who plays in a garden, or a fisherman who throws his nets into the sea. It does not matter what he is, as long as he realizes the perfection of the soul that is within him. The aim of life is self-development, to realize one's nature perfectly. That is what each of us is here for. There is no such thing as a good influence. All influence is immoral. Immoral from the scientific point of view. Words have not merely music as sweet as that of a viol and lute, color as rich and vivid as any that makes lovely for us the canvas of the Venetian or the Spaniard, and plastic form no less and certain than that which reveals itself in marble or in bronze. But thought and passion and spirituality are theirs also, are theirs indeed alone. There is nothing so absolutely pathetic as a really fine paradox. The pun is the clown among jokes. The well-turned paradox is the polished comedian, and the highest comedy verges upon tragedy, just as the keenest edge of tragedy is often tempered by a subtle humor. Our minds are shot with moods as a fabric is shot with colors, and our moods often seem inappropriate. Everything that is true is inappropriate. The longer one studies life and literature, the more strongly one feels that behind everything that is wonderful stands the individual, and that it is not the moment that makes the man, but the man who creates the age. To know the vintage and quality of a wine, one needs not drink the whole cask. It's a sad thing to think of, but there is no doubt that genius lasts longer than beauty. That accounts for the fact that we all take such pains to overeducate ourselves. The ugly and the stupid have the best of it in this world. They can sit at their ease and gape at the play. If they know nothing of victory, they are at least spared the knowledge of defeat. To have a capacity for a passion and not to realize it is to make oneself incomplete and limited. Even in actual life, egotism is not without its attractions. When people talk to us about others, they are usually dull. When they talk to us about themselves, they are nearly always interesting. And if one could shut them up when they become wearisome as easily as one can shut up a book of which one has grown wearied, they would be perfect absolutely. Every great man nowadays has his disciples, and it is invariably Judas who writes the biography. Art finds her own perfection within and not outside of herself. She is not to be judged by any external standard of resemblance. She is a veil rather than a mirror. She has flowers that no forest knows of, birds that no woodland possesses. She makes and unmakes many worlds, and can draw the moon from heaven with a scarlet thread. Hers are the forms more real than living man, in hers the great archetypes of which things that have existence are but unfinished copies. Nature has in her eyes no laws, no uniformity. She can work miracles at her will, and when she calls monsters from the deep, they come. She can bid the almond tree blossom in winter and send the snow upon the ripe cornfield. At her word, the frost lays its silver finger on the burning mouth of June, and the winged lions creep out from the hollows of the Lydian hills. The dryads peer from the thicket as she passes by, and the brown fawns smile strangely at her when she comes near them. She has hawk-faced gods that worship her, and the centaurs gallop at her side. In literature, mere egotism is delightful. If we live for aims, we blunt our emotions. If we live for aims, we live for 1 minute, for 1 day, for 1 year, instead of for every minute, every day, every year. The moods of one's life are life's beauties. To yield to all one's moods is really to live. Many a young man starts in life with a natural gift for exaggeration, which, if nurtured in congenial and sympathetic surroundings, or by the imitations of the best models, might grow into something really great and wonderful. But as a rule, he comes to nothing. He either falls into careless habits of accuracy, or takes to frequenting the society of the aged and the well-informed. Both things are equally fatal to his imagination. The spirit of an age may be best expressed in the abstract ideal arts, for the spirit itself is abstract and ideal. As for believing things, I can believe anything provided that it is quite incredible. Know thyself was written over the portal of the antique world. Over the portal of the new world, be thyself shall be written. And the message of Christ to man was simply, be thyself. That is the secret of Christ. London is full of women who trust their husbands. One can always recognize them. They look so thoroughly unhappy. For those who are not artists, and to whom there is no mode of life but the actual life of fact, pain is the only door to perfection. The English public always feels perfectly at ease when a mediocrity is talking to it. Men always fall into the absurdity of endeavoring to develop the mind, to push it violently forward in this direction or that. The mind should be receptive, a harp waiting to catch the winds, a pool ready to be ruffled, not a bustling busybody forever trotting about on the pavement looking for a new bun shop. There is nothing more beautiful than to forget, except, perhaps, to be forgotten. All bad art comes from returning to life and nature and elevating them into ideals. Life and nature may sometimes be used as part of art's rough material, but before they are of any real service to art, they must be translated into artistic conventions. The moment art surrenders its imaginative medium, it surrenders everything. As a method, realism is a complete failure, and the two things that every artist should avoid are modernity of form and modernity of subject matter. Men may have women's minds just as women may have the minds of men. London is too full of fogs and serious people. Whether the fogs produce the serious people, or whether the serious people produce the fogs, I don't know. How marriage ruins a man. It's as demoralizing as cigarettes, and far more expensive. He must be quite respectable. One has never heard his name before in the whole course of one's life, which speaks volumes for a man nowadays. Literature always anticipates life. It does not copy it, but molds it to its purpose. As long as a thing is useful or necessary to us, or affects us in any way, either for pain or pleasure, or appeals strongly to our sympathies, or is a vital part of the environment in which we live, it is outside the proper sphere of art. I couldn't have a scene in this bonnet. It is far too fragile. A harsh word would ruin it. Music creates for one a past of which one has been ignorant, and fills one with a sense of sorrows that have been hidden from one's tears. Nothing is so fatal to personality as deliberation. I adore London dinner parties. The clever people never listen, and the stupid people never talk. Learned conversation is either the affection of the ignorant or the profession of the mentally unemployed. The academy is too large and too vulgar. Whenever I have gone there, there have been either so many people that I have not been able to see the pictures, which was dreadful, or so many pictures that I have not been able to see the people, which was worse. All art is quite useless. Beauty, real beauty, ends where an intellectual expression begins. Intellect is in itself a mode of exaggeration, and destroys the harmony of any face. The moment one sits down to think, one becomes all nose or forehead, or something horrid. The one charm of marriage is that it makes a life of deception absolutely necessary for both parties. Secrecy seems to be the one thing that can make modern life mysterious or marvelous to us. The commonest thing is delightful if one only hides it. Conceit is one of the greatest of the virtues, yet how few people recognize it as a thing to aim at and to strive after. In conceit, many a man and woman has found salvation, yet the average person goes on all fours groveling after modesty. It is difficult to not be unjust to what one loves. Humanity will always love Rousseau for having confessed his sins not to a friend, but to the world. Just as those who do not love Plato more than truth cannot pass beyond the threshold of the academy, so those who do not love beauty more than truth never know the inmost shrine of art. There is a fatality about all physical and intellectual distinction, the sort of fatality that seems to dog, through history, the faltering steps of kings. It is better not to be different from one's fellows. To be born, or at any rate bred, in a handbag, whether it had handles or not, seems to me to display a contempt for the ordinary decencies of family life that reminds me of one of the worst excesses of the French Revolution. Vice and virtue are to the artist materials for an art. There must be a new hedonism that shall recreate life and save it from that harsh, uncomely Puritanism that is having in our own day its curious revival. It must have its service of the intellect, certainly, yet it must never accept any theory or system that will involve the sacrifice of any mode of passionate experience. Its aim, indeed, is to be experience itself, and not the fruits of experience, bitter or sweet as they may be. Of the aestheticism that deadens the senses, as of the vulgar profligacy that dulls them, it is to know nothing. But it is to teach man to concentrate himself upon the moments of a life that is to itself but a moment. Art never expresses anything but itself. It has an independent life just as thought has, and develops purely on its own lines. It is not necessarily realistic in an age of realism, nor spiritual in an age of faith. So far from being the creation of its time, it is usually in direct opposition to it, and the only history that it preserves for us is the history of its own progress. People who mean well always do badly. They are like the ladies who wear clothes that don't fit them in order to show their piety. Good intentions are invariably ungrammatical. Man can believe the impossible, but man can never believe the improbable. When art is more varied, nature will, no doubt, be more varied also. If a man is sufficiently imaginative to produce evidence in support of a lie, he might just as well speak the truth at once. The ancient historians gave us delightful fiction in the form of fact. The modern novelist presents us with dull facts under the guise of fiction. Nature is no great mother who has borne us. She is our own creation. It is in our brain that she quickens to life. Things are because we see them, and what we see and how we see it depends on the arts that have influenced us. To look at a thing is very different from seeing a thing. One does not see anything until one sees its beauty. The proper school to learn art is not in life, but art. I won't tell you that the world matters nothing, or the world's voice, or the voice of society. They matter a good deal. They matter far too much. I wouldn't marry a man with a future before him for anything under the sun. I am the only person in the world I should like to know thoroughly, but I don't see any chance of it just at present. Modern memoirs are generally written by people who have entirely lost their memories and have never done anything worth recording. Education is an admirable thing, but it is well to remember from time to time that nothing that is worth knowing can be taught. Women are like minors. They live upon their expectations. Twisted minds are as natural to some people as twisted bodies. It is the very passions about whose origins we deceive ourselves that tyrannize most strongly over us. Our weaker motives are those of whose nature we are conscious. It often happens that when we think we are experimenting on others, we are really experimenting on ourselves. Whenever a man does a thoroughly stupid thing, it is always from the noblest motives. I thought I had no heart. I find I have, and a heart doesn't suit me. Somehow it doesn't go with modern dress. It makes one look old, and it spoils one's career at critical moments. I don't play accurately. Anyone can play accurately, but I play with wonderful expression. As far as the piano is concerned, sentiment is my forte. I keep science for life. I delight in men over 70. They always offer one the devotion of a lifetime. Everybody who is incapable of learning has taken to teaching. That is really what our enthusiasm for education has come to. Nature hates mind. From the point of view of form, the type of all the arts is the art of the musician. From the point of view of feeling, the actor's craft is the type. Where we differ from each other is purely in accidentals, in dress, manner, tone of voice, religious opinions, personal appearance, tricks of habit, and the like. The more we study art, the less we care for nature. What art really reveals to us is nature's lack of design, her curious crudities, her extraordinary monotony, her absolutely unfinished condition. It is fortunate for us, however, that nature is so imperfect, as otherwise we should have had no art at all. Art is our spirited protest, our gallant attempt to teach nature her proper place. As for the infinite variety of nature, that is a pure myth. It is not to be found in nature herself. It resides in the imagination or fancy or cultivated blindness of the man who looks at her. Facts are not merely finding a footing place in history, but they are usurping the domain of fancy and have invaded the kingdom of romance. Their chilling touch is over everything. They are vulgarizing mankind. Ordinary people wait till life discloses to them its secrets, but to the few, to the elect, the mysteries of life are revealed before the veil is drawn away. Sometimes this is the effect of art, and chiefly of the art of literature, which deals immediately with the passions of the intellect. But now and then a complex personality takes the place and assumes the office of art. Indeed, in its way a real work of art. Life having its elaborate masterpieces, just as poetry has, or sculpture, or painting. Thinking is the most unhealthy thing in the world, and people die of it just as they die of any other disease. A cigarette is the perfect type of a perfect pleasure. It is exquisite, and it leaves one unsatisfied. The aim of the liar is simply to charm, to delight, to give pleasure. He is the very basis of civilized society. It is quite a mistake to believe, as many people do, that the mind shows itself in the face. Vice may sometimes write itself in lines and changes of contour, but that is all. Our faces are really masks given to us to conceal our minds with. What on earth should we men do going about with purity and innocence? A carefully thought-out buttonhole is much more effective. The only difference between a caprice and a lifelong passion is that the caprice lasts a little longer. People say sometimes that beauty is only superficial. That may be so, but at least it is not so superficial as thought is. It is the spectator and not life that art really mirrors. Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Conscience and cowardice are really the same things. Conscience is the trade name of the firm. That is all. In every sphere of life, form is the beginning of things. The rhythmic, harmonious gestures of dancing convey, Plato tells us, both rhythm and harmony into the mind. Forms are the food of faith, cried Newman, in one of those great moments of sincerity that makes us admire and know the man. He was right, though he may not have known how terribly right he was. The creeds are believed not because they are rational, but because they are repeated. Yes, form is everything. It is the secret of life. Find expression for a sorrow, and it will become dear to you. Find expression for a joy, and you intensify its ecstasy. Do you wish to love? Use love's litany, and the words will create the yearning from which the world fancies that they spring. Have you a grief that corrodes your heart? Learn its utterance from Prince Hamlet and Queen Constance, and you will find that mere expression is a mode of consolation, and that form, which is the birth of passion, is also the death of pain. And so, to return to the sphere of art, it is form that creates not merely the critical temperament, but also the aesthetic instinct that reveals to one all things under the condition of beauty. Start with a worship of form, and there is no secret in art that will not be revealed to you. It is only the intellectually lost who ever argue. Nowadays, most people die of a sort of creeping common sense, and discover when it is too late that the only things one never regrets are one's mistakes. Lady Henry Wotton was a curious woman, whose dresses always looked as if they had been designed in a rage and put on in a tempest. She was usually in love with somebody, and as her passion was never returned, she had kept all her illusions. She tried to look picturesque, but only succeeded in being untidy. Those who go beneath the surface do so at their peril. With an evening coat and a white tie, anybody, even a stockbroker, can gain a reputation for being civilized. There is nothing so interesting as telling a good man or woman how bad one has been. It is intellectually fascinating. One of the greatest pleasures of having been wicked is that one has so much to say to the good. Laws are made in order that people in authority may not remember them, just as marriages are made in order that the divorce court may not play about idly. To get back one's youth, one has merely to repeat one's follies. Never marry a woman with straw-colored hair. They are so sentimental. The reason we all like to think so well of others is that we are all afraid for ourselves. The basis of optimism is sheer terror. We think that we are generous because we credit our neighbors with the possession of those virtues that are likely to be a benefit to us. We praise the banker that we may overdraw our account, and find good qualities in the highwayman, in the hope that he may spare our pockets. I have the greatest contempt for optimism. Art begins with abstract decoration, with purely imaginative and pleasurable work dealing with what is unreal and non-existent. This is the first stage. Then life becomes fascinated with this new wonder, and asks to be admitted into the charmed circle. Art takes life as part of her rough material, recreates it and refashions it in fresh form, is absolutely indifferent to facts, invents, imagines, dreams, and keeps between herself and reality the impenetrable barrier of beautiful style, of decorative or ideal treatment. The third stage is when life gets the upper hand and drives art out into the wilderness. This is the true decadence, and it is from this that we are now suffering. Good intentions have been the ruin of the world. The only people who have achieved anything have been those who have had no intentions at all. I never take any notice of what common people say, and I never interfere with what charming people do. You know, I am not a champion of marriage. The real drawback to marriage is that it makes one unselfish, and unselfish people are colorless. They lack individuality. Still, there are certain temperaments that marriage makes more complex. They retain their egotism and add to it many other egos. They are forced to have more than one life. They become more highly organized, and to be highly organized is, I should fancy, the object of man's existence. Besides, every experience is of value, and whatever one may say against marriage, it is certainly an experience. Those who read the symbol do so at their peril. I never talk during music, at least not during good music. If anyone hears bad music, it is one's duty to drown it in conversation. When critics disagree, the artist is in accord with himself. Faith is the most plural thing I know. We are all supposed to believe in the same thing in different ways. It is like eating out of the same dish with different colored spoons. Experience is of no ethical value. It is merely the name men give to their mistakes. Moralists have, as a rule, regarded it as a mode of warning, have claimed for it a certain ethical efficacy in the formation of character, have praised it as something that teaches us what to follow and shows us what to avoid. But there is no motive power in experience. It is as little of an active cause as conscience itself. All that it really demonstrates is that our future will be the same as our past, and that the sin we have done once, and with loathing, we shall do many times, and with joy. Sensations are the details that build up the stories of our lives. No artist has ethical sympathies. An ethical sympathy in an artist is an unpardonable mannerism of style. She looks like an edition de luxe of a wicked French novel meant specifically for the English market. I never knew what terror was before. I know it now. It is as if a hand of ice were laid upon one's heart. It is as if one's heart were beating itself to death in some empty hollow. We can forgive a man for making a useful thing, as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. No artist desires to prove anything. Even things that are true can be proved. One knows so well the popular idea of health. The English country gentleman galloping along after a fox, the unspeakable in pursuit of the uneatable. People seldom tell the truths that are worth telling. We ought to choose our truths as carefully as we choose our lies, and to select our virtues with as much thought as we bestow upon the selection of our enemies. Soul and body, body and soul. How mysterious they are. There is animalism in the soul, and the body has its moments of spirituality. The senses can refine, and the intellect can degrade. Who can say where the fleshly impulse ceases, where the psychical impulse begins? How shallow are the arbitrary definitions of ordinary psychologists, and yet how difficult to decide between the claims of the various schools. Is the soul a shadow seated in the house of sin, or is the body really in the soul, as Giordano Bruno thought? The separation of spirit from matter is a mystery, and the unison of spirit with matter is a mystery also. Those who find beautiful meanings in beautiful things are the cultivated. For these there is hope. There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all. Marriage is a sort of forcing house. It brings strange sins to fruit, and sometimes strange renunciations. The moral life of man forms part of the subject matter of the artist, but the morality of art consists in the perfect use of an imperfect medium. A sense of duty is like some horrible disease. It destroys the tissues of the mind, as certain complaints destroy the tissues of the body. The Catechism has a great deal to answer for. They are the elect, to whom beautiful things mean only beauty. Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. Few people have sufficient strength to resist the preposterous claims of orthodoxy. She wore far too much rouge last night and not quite enough clothes. That is always a sign of despair in a woman. A virtue is like a city set upon a hill. It cannot be hid. We can conceal our vices if we care to, for a time at least, but a virtue will out. Can't make out how you stand London society. The thing has gone to the dogs. A lot of damned nobodies talking about nothing. You don't know what an existence they lead down there. It is pure, unadulterated country life. They get up early because they have so much to do, and go to bed early because they have so little to think about. Nothing is so fatal to a personality as the keeping of promises, unless it be telling the truth. Who cares whether Mr. Ruskin's views on Turner are sound or not? What does it matter? That mighty and majestic prose of his, so fervid and so fiery-colored in its noble eloquence, so rich in its elaborate symphonic music, so sure and certain, at its best and subtle choice of word and epithet, is at least as great a work of art as any of those wonderful sunsets that bleach or rot in their corrupted canvases in England's gallery. Greater, indeed, one is apt to think at times, not merely because its equal beauty is more enduring, but on account of the fuller variety of its appeal, soul speaking to soul in those long cadenced lines, not through form and color alone, though through these, indeed, completely and without loss, but without intellectual and emotional utterance, with lofty passion and with loftier thought, with imaginative insight and with poetic aim, greater, I always think, even as literature is the greater art. Laughter is not at all a bad beginning for a friendship, and it is far the best ending for one. Mrs. Cheveley is one of those very modern women of our time who find a new scandal as becoming as a new bonnet, and air them both in the park every afternoon at 5:30. I am sure she adores scandals, and that the sorrow of her life at present is that she can't manage to have enough of them. The world divides actions into three classes: good actions, bad actions that you may do, and bad actions that you may not do. If you stick to the good actions, you are respected by the good. If you stick to the bad actions that you may do, you are respected by the bad. But if you perform the bad actions that no one may do, then the good and the bad set upon you, and you are lost indeed. I choose my friends for their good looks, my acquaintances for their good characters, and my enemies for their good intellects. The artist is the creator of beautiful things. To me, the word natural means all that is middle class, all that is of the essence of jingoism, all that is colorless and without form and void. It might be a beautiful word, but it is the most debased coin in the currency of language. I pity any woman who is married to a man called John. She would probably never be allowed to know the entrancing pleasure of a single moment's solitude. It is only when we have learned to love forgetfulness that we have learned the art of living. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim. The world taken en masse is a monster, crammed with prejudices, packed with prepossessions, cankered with what it calls virtues, a Puritan, a prig. And the art of life is the art of defiance, to defy. That is what we ought to live for, instead of living as we do to acquiesce. Some resemblance the creative work of the critic will have to the work that has stirred him to creation, but it will be such a resemblance as exists not between nature and the mirror that the painter of landscape or figure may be supposed to hold up to her, but between nature and the work of the decorative artist. Just as on the flowerless carpets of Persia tulip and rose blossom indeed, and are lovely to look on, though they are not reproduced in visible shape or line, just as the pearl and the purple of the seashell is echoed in the church of St. Mark at Venice, just as the vaulted ceiling of the wondrous chapel at Ravenna is made gorgeous by the gold and green and sapphire of the peacock's tail, though the birds of Juno fly not across it. So the critic reproduces the work that he criticizes in a mode that is never imitative, and part of whose charm may really consist in the rejection of resemblance, and shows us in this way not merely the meaning, but also the mystery of beauty, and by transforming each art into literature, solves once for all the problem of art's unity. Diversity of opinion about a work of art shows that the work is new, complex, and vital. Nothing is more painful to me than to come across virtue in a person in whom I have never suspected its existence. It is like finding a needle in a bundle of hay. It pricks you. If we have virtue, we should warn people of it. The critic is he who can translate into another manner or a new material his impression of beautiful things. Hopper is one of nature's gentlemen, the worst type of gentleman I know. If one intends to be good, one must take it up as a profession. It is quite the most engrossing one in the world. I like Wagner's music better than anybody's. It is so loud that one can talk the whole time without other people hearing what one says. All art is at once surface and symbol. Childhood is one long career of innocent eavesdropping, of hearing what one ought not to hear. The highest as the lowest form of criticism is a mode of autobiography. The only things worth saying are those that we forget, just as the only things worth doing are those that the world is surprised at. Maturity is one long career of saying what one ought not to say. That is the art of conversation. Virtue is generally merely a form of defiancy, just as vice is an assertion of intellect. People teach in order to conceal their ignorance, as people smile in order to conceal their tears. To be unnatural is often to be great. To be natural is generally to be stupid. To lie finely is an art. To tell the truth is to act according to nature. People who talk sense are like people who break stones in the road. They cover one with dust and splinters. Jesus said to man, "You have a wonderful personality. Develop it. Be yourself. Don't imagine that your perfection lies in accumulating or possessing external things. Your perfection is inside of you. If only you could realize that, you would not want to be rich. Ordinary riches can be stolen from a man. Real riches cannot. In the treasury house of your soul, there is infinitely precious things that may not be taken from you. Try to so shape your life that external things will not harm you, and try also to get rid of personal property. It involves sordid preoccupation, endless industry, continual wrong. Personal property hinders individualism at every step. When Jesus talks about the poor, he simply means personalities, just as when he talks about the rich, he simply means people who have not developed their personalities. An echo is often more beautiful than the voice it repeats. This is the end of Miscellaneous Aphorisms by Oscar Wilde. Thank you for listening.